right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. It is the last day of September. In fact, this will be our last live lesson of September. But not to worry, tomorrow we start an even crazier month of October. I think we're pushing over 30 live events, and I think it's just going to keep going. It's also our space exploration month, so we'll be connecting with astronauts and scientists and engineers from NASA and the Canadian Space Agency and other cool organizations to learn about the work that they're doing, exploring our solar system and beyond, but also turning that lens back on our planet and exploring Earth like we never have before. So visit exploringbytheseat.com. You can find all those lessons that we do have coming up. So to finish up our September, we are going to go to, well, the top of our planet. So we have Alex Harz joining us. He's joined us a few times in the past to share the amazing work he's done on the Quest Everest, which was an epic journey through the Himalayas to Everest, climbing to the top and documenting that amazing journey. So not only in 2D like we're used to, but in 360 in VR action. So taking students, taking the general public to the top of Everest in a way very few have ever seen it before. So we're going to get a chance to meet Alex. We're going to check out some amazing footage, and then we're going to have some Q&A action. So I think it's going to be a great way to wrap up September. Before I bring Alex in with us, I think the best thing to do is to introduce him a little bit through video, through the 2D regular screen documentary trailer. So let's take a look at that together. And then we'll get Alex in here with us front and center, and we will go behind the scenes, and then we will be off to the races. So here we go.
Hey, nowhere else in the world would we climb an icefall like this. Nowhere. You'd be nutter.
Number one thing is you have to be very mentally prepared for it.
Welcome to Nepal.
Thank you so much.
You climb the Mount Everest, right?
That's where I'm going.
The Sherpas, the goddess of this sacred mountain.
This monastery was built in the 16th century. At that time, this monastery was already destroyed once by the avalanche.
I've never been to this country before. I've never been to the Khumbu Valley. Never been to Mount Everest. It's not about this mountain. It's about you guys.
Becoming mountain guide is not easy.
I want to say, all girls, you should come and you can follow your dream.
To camp tour, it looks okay, and after that, I'll let you know.
What piece of advice would you give someone?
If you want to climb the mountain and go back to your home, just prepare for it before you come here.
Be scared and be intimidated and be humble.
There's a lot of crevasse, open crevasse.
I came to Nepal on a quest to explore this captivating country and to honor the childhood promise. But I leave with so much more.
All right, let's bring the man behind the quest, the man behind the journey. Alex, let's get him in here with us. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Great. How you doing, Joe? It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Alex. It's always great to have you with us. I don't think this story, ever gets old for students. There's this mystique around Everest, the tallest mountain on the planet. There's adventure, there's action, there's human stories. It really is a beautiful place. And to be able to bring it to classrooms, to the general public, in our formats we're used to, but 360 as well is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was an absolute humble honor to do so, to do this project and to be successful in not only climbing Everest, but to come back with the footage to share with the rest of the world in 2D and in 360 virtual reality. I think it's, the main driver behind that was knowing that most people on this planet either won't have the desire or ability to ever climb Mount Everest. So if I could bring the closest possible experiences to them of what it's like to climb the mountain without getting off the couch and having to try it themselves, then that would be a success in my book, and that's really what I was trying to do here.
All right, well, I've got some behind the scenes photos, so let's pop through some of those, give students a little taste of what it was like working your way to the mountain and then the summit, and then we'll turn the classrooms loose. So let's get my screen sharing here one more time, and we want this one. And there we go. Good to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting picture because there I am in a place called Pashupatinath Temple in Kathmandu, which is the oldest religious site in all of Nepal. It's about 3,000 years old, and it's sacred for Hindus. Nepal is a Hindu dominant country, and what you see there in the background is actually ash and fire, and it's not, garbage or anything like that. That's actually human bodies being burned on those concrete slabs that are called ghats. And so it's open 24 hours a day. People can come worship at the temple 24 hours a day, as well as bring their final rites of passage to their loved ones by cremating them there on those ghats and sweeping their ashes into the Bagmati River, which is right in front of it. It's a very sacred, holy river for Nepalese Hindus because it connects with the Ganges River lower downstream, which is the most sacred river in all of Hinduism. So we were there for quite a bit of time filming, these ceremonies and these rituals, and to get some more advice and spiritual guidance for my upcoming quest. There are the Hindu sadhus. Hindu sadhus are holy wise men, and these Hindu sadhus here are actually living on the ground. So they've denounced all material wealth and, given themselves 100% to the Hindu faith and to be spiritual guides to people that would like to seek them out to get some guidance, for their passage in life. And so I went and I sat down and talked with them and interviewed them and got some very interesting information and some interesting background about not only Hinduism, but also about how that can be relevant to my quest to go to Mount Everest. There we are now getting up into the Khumbu Valley, and the Khumbu Valley is where Mount Everest sits on the Nepal side of things. Matter of fact, at the end of the Khumbu Valley sits Mount Everest, and we're starting now the 9-day trek. It takes 9 days to get to Mount Everest base camp if you're trekking, and there are no roads that lead to Everest. So everything that goes to Everest base camp has to either be carried by a human, a helicopter, or in this case, a yak, which is a high altitude animal that does very well at altitude and is a heavy lifting animal to get supplies to Everest Base Camp. And here it is walking across one of the many river crossings on the way to Everest Base Camp. This is Namche Bazaar. Namche Bazaar is a very interesting place. It is the de facto Sherpa capital, meaning the Sherpa people, which are the dominant culture in the Khumbu Valley. They came over to Nepal and settled in the Khumbu Valley about 650 years ago. And this is their main town or village in the Khumbu Valley where most operations take place. It's also a traditionally significant trading point between the Tibetan Plateau to the north and to the Kathmandu Valley down below. So it's a very fascinating place, and we spent about 2 days here, one day getting there and then also spending a acclimatization day to let our bodies adjust to the increasing altitude as we're trekking up the Khumbu Valley. Here is a peak called Tamsirku, or which in Sherpa translates to 9 peaks. And you can see the 9 different little peaks there that make up the mountain. It is one of the first major peaks that you get to see as you start to work your way up the Khumbu Valley. And this is shot right outside of Namche Bazaar, which is that slide you just saw prior. And also in the shot, you can see are the Tibetan prayer flags. And the Tibetan prayer flags are significant because A, they have 5 different colors on it, which represent the different elements. But on those different prayer flags, they also have these mantras or ohms that are projected by the wind across the valley and everywhere else that it can reach to bring blessings and good guidance to the people that are able to be touched by those blessings that come off those prayer flags. And so you see those throughout the Khumbu Valley, mainly on high points, because the highest points will catch the most wind and to deliver those prayers or those mantras to the most people below. This is actually looking from a peak called Kalapatar. We did this little climb as a climatization hike on our way to Everest Base Camp, and what you can see in the distance from the top of Kalapatar is that gray pyramid in the background. That's actually Mount Everest. You then have in front of it called the West Shoulder. That's actually part of Mount Everest as well, but that is the West Shoulder protruding off of Mount Everest. And in the foreground, that's somewhat obstructed by those gray clouds. That is Nuptse, which is one of the three mountains that make up the Everest Massif, which is Mount Everest, Mount Nuptse, and Mount Lhotse. And then down below on that ice field that you see, that's actually the Khumbu Glacier, and that's where Mount Everest Base Camp lies, and that is where we are heading to in order to then start the next phase of the expedition. Here we are actually at Everest Base Camp on that ice sheet that I was mentioning, the Khumbu Glacier, which is the highest glacier in the world. This is at about 17,500 feet where base camp sits, and it sits on that moving slab of ice, that Khumbu Glacier, and it moves, constantly throughout the year. And so during the expedition season while we were there, it takes 43 days to go from base camp to the summit of Everest and back down. And during that time, actually, we have to adjust our campsite and so on because we spend quite a bit of time down here at base camp because of that ice sheet that's constantly moving downhill. Here we are doing a puja ceremony, and a puja ceremony is a very significant ceremony for the Sherpa people, again, which is the dominant culture in the Khumbu Valley. The reason why it is important to do a puja ceremony before we climb Mount Everest is because we're asking Mount Everest, or Chomolungma, which means Goddess Mother of the World, as the Sherpa people refer to Mount Everest, for the guidance and permission to not only step foot on Chomolungma or Mount Everest, but also for safe passage for our way to the top of the mountain. So nobody is allowed to step foot on Mount Everest or Chomolungma until they go through one of these puja ceremonies, which pays respect to the mountain and asks for permission for safe passage. So this is our team here performing the puja ceremony. Here we are in that Khumbu Icefall, which is the first major objective that we have to try to overcome in order to work our way up the mountain. And as you can see by those cracks there in the ice and the snow, those are crevasses. And the Khumbu Icefall is a series of crevasses, big blocks of ice that are known as seracs and crevasses that move downhill at 3 to 6 feet a day. So, we went through the icefall. I went through the icefall personally 8 times, and I never went through the icefall the same way, because again, that route is constantly changing. The ladders are getting knocked down, the ropes there have to be adjusted because it is constantly moving downhill at 3 to 6 feet a day. And those big blocks of ice that are the size of cars or houses or even office buildings will fall over like Jenga blocks at any given moment. So therefore we have to then kind of make adjustments to try to find our way through this area, which is about 2.5 miles of distance between base camp and Camp 1. Here we are again going through the Khumbu Icefall, and as you can see, we're climbing up these ladders, and we're, hooked into ropes to try to make our way over these massive blocks of ice, that are obstructing our way, and we're trying to find our way through the icefall. Here I am crossing a ladder. This is actually 2 ladders strung together by fishing string. Both of these ladders are about 10 to 15 feet long, and they're again being held together by just twine, fishing twine, and that's what allows us to try to get across those crevasses. Now, the interesting thing about that is, not only is it kind of strange to walk across a ladder in order to go through a crevasse that could be several hundred feet deep or even bottomless, where you don't even see the bottom. What's interesting about it too is that you only have these little tiny pieces of metal on the front of your spikes on your boots and on the back of your boots that connect you to those rungs on the ladder, and you have to kind of balance on those to make your way across those ladders. And they also flow up and down because they're connected together by string, and they're aluminum ladders, so they have a little bit of bend to them. Here I am actually going across one of those ladders. You can see the video of me looking down into the crevasse, and so you can see what I'm talking about. It's a big open expanse of space, and there I am with just my tiptoes and my heels making contact to those aluminum rungs on those aluminum ladders. So it's not for the faint of heart, and not the easiest or necessarily the safest thing to do. Here I am and the rest of my team climbing one of those crevasse walls. We are now above the Khumbu Icefall. We're now in our area called the Western Khum, which stretches between Camp 1 and Camp 2. So in order to get from Camp 1 to Camp 2, we have to go through the Western Khum, which means Silent Valley. And we have sometimes these big crevasse walls that you have to climb. And this one's about a 55, 60-foot vertical wall that you have to climb to get up and over and to continue on up the valley. Here we are now above Camp 2 and above Camp 3. And between Camp 2, Camp 3, and Camp 4 is this massive wall of ice known as the Lhotse Face. And the Lhotse Face is the start of the fourth highest mountain in the world, Lhotse, which is one of those three mountains that's connected to the Everest Massif, Mount Everest, Mount Lhotse, and Mount Nuptse. And at the top of this 5,000-foot wall of ice that you have to scale to get from Camp 2 to Camp 4, we're looking back down essentially to part of the area that we trekked in from. And in the distance there in the clouds, you can see one of the most iconic peaks in the Khumbu Valley known as Ahmad Ablam, peeking through the clouds there straight in front of us. And here we are looking back down from the direction that we came from. Here we are now at Camp 4. So after getting above that Lhotse Face and traversing over to get to Camp 4, you can actually see now the summit, or actually the south summit, part of the summit of Mount Everest in front of us. That is the triangular face of Mount Everest. And this here at Camp 4 is the last place that you kind of stage from to make your way to the top. This is at 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters. It's also known as the death zone because you can't stay up here long before you ultimately will die. Matter of fact, you can only stay up here for 1 to 2 days, maybe 3 if you're lucky max. And no matter who you are, if you stay up there any longer than that, you're not going to make it back down alive. Here are the tents that we, take a brief break in to try to have a little bit of water, get a bite of dehydrated food, and work our way up for the summit that's straight ahead of us. Here I am leaving in the middle of the night. When you go for the summit of Everest from Camp 4 there, you don't start usually at the daytime, you start in the middle of the night. And so we started at midnight because the idea is you want to try to get to the summit during the daytime and get back down to those tents that you saw on the previous slide before it's dark again, because you don't want to get caught out in the middle of the night trying to descend, from the summit of Everest. So here I am at midnight, heading out from those tents, working our way up towards the summit. Here I'm actually climbing on the southeast ridge of Mount Everest, and on the southeast ridge, we have these areas known as the rock slabs, and these rock slabs are vertical rocks, and as you can see, they're pretty steep, and there is no snow on them and to a large degree. So now we're using those little metal crampons that are on the front of my feet and the back of my heels to try to now grip into rock, which is significantly harder than trying to push into snow or ice. And so actually I'm crawling on my hands and looking down at my feet to where I place them in order to make my way up on this vertical rock section within the rock slabs on the southeast ridge of Mount Everest. Here I am now above the main part of the southeast ridge, which is actually the dividing point between Nepal and Tibet. So on the right side of this slide, you would actually look into China or Tibet. And on the left side or straight ahead, you can see right back where we came from, down at that bottom, right in the middle of that little triangle that leads to a piece of snow or a piece of ice at the bottom, is the Khumbu Glacier where we started from. And so we worked our way up through those crevasse fields, as you can see down below, up that steep wall of ice known the Lhotse Face, and then connected to the ridge that you saw in the couple slides back to get to where we are now. And we're now nearing the summit slope of Everest. And in the distance, you can also see some of the other 8,000 meter or 26,000 foot peaks, which there are 14 in the world in the distance. So we're now getting closer to the summit of Everest. And here I am actually a selfie on the summit of Everest. You can see in the background again the Lhotse and Nuptse ridge line, that kind of connects down to the Lhotse Face that we had to scale. And below it there was the Western Khum and the start of the Khumbu Icefall. In the distance, again, you can see some of the other parts of Tibet in the background on those peaks. And the glacier there is the Rongbuk Glacier, or actually that's leading now down into the Tibetan region. And here I am on the summit doing a selfie. there it is again on the summit of Everest. It's about the size of two ping pong tables. We're on the summit all by myself with just one other person for about 45 minutes. And so I had an amazing view to looking 200 miles into China or Tibet, 200 miles into India, and 200 miles into Nepal. As far as my eyes could see, you can see the curvature of the earth there from 29,032 feet or 8,849 meters. And that is the top of the world.
All right. There we go. Alex, thank you so much for that behind the scenes look at the climb. And I really want to stress to the classrooms of students joining in today, really how special it was to be able to be on the summit like that by yourself and for such a long period of time. That doesn't happen a lot.
It does not, and it's one of those things that you could try to plan 1,000 different times to get everything just right, and you couldn't replicate that twice. So, again, I'm not only fortunate to have had the summit of Everest, by myself for 45 minutes with only one other person, but to then humbly come back down in one piece with all that content, to share with the rest of the world.
All right, awesome. Well, I say we get into some Q&A action now. I know we have a great group of classrooms. Some of them are tuning in via YouTube. So don't be shy. Use the chat sidebar. You can send your questions in there. I'll see those and we'll be able to ask Alex some of those questions. We also have some groups hiding out backstage with us. So I'm going to bring some of them in. We'll give them a chance to ask some of their questions live. So before I grab a camera classroom, let's grab something from YouTube to warm us up and get us started. And this first question, Alex, is about the trek there. How long did it take you and what was the most challenging part of that?
Yeah, it took 9 days. So, there are no roads that lead to Lukla, which is kind of the starting village that you start at for that 9-day trek to base camp. We had to fly in with an airplane, and you land on, statistically the deadliest runway in the world. And so it's a very tight little fit to kind of land and then start your trek. But it takes 9 days. Probably the most challenging part was as you got a little bit higher was the altitude. There are some sections that are a little bit, steep uphill kind of climbing, hour after hour, or should I say trekking hour after hour, which can be challenging. But as you go higher and higher, the oxygen density gets less and less and less. So now you really start to feel how thin the air is during that trek, the last couple of days as we were near in base camp.
Okay. All right. Let's get in some faces and voices on camera. So we happen to have a homeschool crew hanging out with us today, Tammy and Decker. I'm going to bring them in here front and center with us. How are we doing today?
We're good. Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
We're wondering how you train for that high altitude.
Yeah, that was a very difficult thing. I had a routine for 1 calendar year before I left to Nepal. So I trained 7 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day. I didn't take one day off over the course of a year. And so I had a whole routine that I just mirrored. Every 7 days was a cycle. I could tell you what that was. On Mondays, I would run somewhere between 10 to 15 miles. On Tuesdays, I would do between 1,000 to 1,500 step-ups with 60 to 75 pounds of weight in my backpack. So I would step up on a bench, move over, go down, up and over, back down. Do that about 1,000 to 1,500 times, working my way up gradually, as I was going more months into my training. On Wednesdays, I would then run hill sprints, or interval training where I would run in sprints, wind sprints like you would see on a football field, or run uphill, to try to get that cardio bursting effect in. Then on Thursday, I would do upper body training because there is also quite a bit of upper body work because you're doing some climbing. You have to pull yourself up on some of these ropes and across the ladder. So I would use that. Friday, I would start over again, run another 10 to 15 miles. Saturday, I would do the heavy pack work or go up in the mountains. Sundays, again, I would do hill sprints again, or again, do a trek somewhere outside in one of the mountains where I live here in Colorado, some of the bigger peaks out here. And then I would rinse, cycle, repeat for over the course of a year before I left to go to Nepal.
Wow.
So I was in the best shape of my life. Let's put it that way. Even better than I played college athletics here in the United States. I was a soccer player. And even when I played the highest level of soccer in my life, I wasn't in as good of shape as when I got onto the airplane to go to Nepal to climb Mount Everest.
Yeah. All right. I have one more. Was there ever a moment when you were on your way that you thought, I just can't do it? that you thought you might give up?
Yeah, there's a lot of those moments. I think high altitude mountaineering in general, and especially Mount Everest, is a game of constantly lying to yourself and being a cheerleader to your own self and to the people around you. So your body, you don't want to be there. There's never been a civilization that's lived above 17,000 feet because we can't stay there indefinitely. We would ultimately die. And so we're not meant to be at those altitudes. And as the higher you go up the mountain, the quicker your body deteriorates, the more pain that you feel, the more suffering that you have to endure, the more times you tell yourself, what am I doing here? And you have to constantly, pep yourself up as well as your teammates, and oftentimes lie to yourself and say, oh, it's just another 50 feet, another 50 feet, another 50 feet. And after doing that hour after hour, hopefully you get to the destination that you're trying to get to in that given day.
Yeah. So it's training your body and your mind.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely right. Yes.
All right. Perfect. Thanks for those great questions to get us started. Maybe we'll check in again towards the end to see if you have a follow-up for us. And I think, Alex, that preparation, that work on the mountain, maybe, puts things in perspective for students who are thinking, oh, I just don't want to do my math homework tonight. You can use some of those techniques. Oh, it's one more question. It's one more. I can get there. I can do it. So
you're absolutely right, Joe. That's a good point, because there's a couple things that I really learned, about myself, and I think that are very applicable to the rest of my life. And that is, in order to make it to the summit of Everest, I realized I had to go 20% harder at that effort than anything I've ever done in my life. So yes, for example, if it's to study math questions and you have to do 50 of them, okay, well, you could probably do 60, go 20% harder. I guarantee you could do 60 questions. Or if you're working 80 hours a week, you could do 96, or if you're running 24 miles to train for a marathon, well, go ahead and do 30, because we all have that extra 20% in us that we didn't know we had, and it's that extra 20% that you need in order to make it to the top of Mount Everest. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. And so that's something that I learned not only about myself, but something that I realized I can carry over in everyday life for the rest of my life.
All right. So we've got Thompson's 5.6s backstage with us. I don't know if their camera's working, but we should be able to get their audio. If you want to go ahead and unmute 5.6s, we'd love to grab a couple questions. There they are.
Hi. So what kind of gear do you have to wear to make it to the top?
Very good question. Quite a bit of stuff, a couple duffel bags full of stuff I had to bring from Colorado. But some of the most important pieces of gear are actually this down suit behind me. This is rated to a -40 below zero. It's basically like walking around in a sleeping bag, with arms and legs. And you need this in order to endure the extreme cold that you experience the higher up the mountain you go. So that's very important. The helmet's pretty important. If a piece of rock or ice falls on you, you don't want it to hit your head. So, luckily that you can see some dents in it on this helmet, actually, because I did get it a few times. So that's pretty important. Maybe the most important piece of equipment are these two pieces that are sometimes overlooked. It's kind of like the tires to a car. You can have all this fancy stuff on a car, but without tires and wheels, you don't have a car. The same thing goes with the boots. Without these boots, which are rated also to a -40 degrees to keep your toes warm from getting frostbite, but also that coincides with these boots are these things are the crampons that I mentioned earlier. And you can see the spikes here on the front and on the back. And these are the only things that are keeping you connected to the mountain. Without these things tied to your bottom of your boots, there's no way you're getting up Mount Everest, because it's all rock, snow, and ice. And without that, you're not going to be able to bite into that snow or be able to bite in that ice in order to make it to the top. So arguably, these are maybe these two most important pieces of equipment, and some of the pieces of equipment that most people never even talk about, kind of like the wheels and tires to your car.
All right, good stuff. Okay, we'll check in with our 5.6s and see if they have another question for us in a moment. Let's go back to YouTube. Where's our class? Here we go. Looks like we've got Miss Pearson's crew, 5th graders in California, hanging out with us, and they have sent in a couple questions. So the first one is the ladders. When you're going across those ladders tied together with string and rope, was that kind of scary?
It absolutely was. Matter of fact, a perfect story or point to that was the first time we went into the Khumbu Icefall. Like I said, I went through it 8 times. The first time we went into it, there was a guy from another expedition that was in front of us. And again, everyone on Everest is very well trained. It's something that you have to really kind of build up over the years to put yourself in that best possible position to try to make it to the summit. And there was an athlete, a very high level athlete, endurance athlete that was in front of us. And he got to that first ladder crossing, and similar to like that video clip that you showed, Joe, you could look down into the crevasse and not see the bottom. And he got there and he put his first 2 feet on the rungs of ladder, and the ladder started swaying up and down because it was about 4, maybe 5 ladders tied together. So we're moving about 1 meter, 3 feet or so with each step. And he just started shaking. He started shaking and he froze up like the deer in headlights. And he turned around and he went back home, never to try again. So it wasn't because the guy wasn't in good shape. I guarantee he was in phenomenal shape, or maybe not even mentally tough. He definitely was, but that was just a little too scary for him to go on. And again, that's kind of those instances on the mountain where you have to kind of convince yourself, pep yourself up, lie to yourself, maybe even to say, yeah, this is okay. I can make this happen. And one of those things that helped me do that was I was filming. And since I was filming, I was so hyper focused on trying to get the footage, to tell the story, that I kind of forgot sometimes about the danger that's around me, or maybe how scary the situation in front of me may be, because I was so focused on looking through my lens to try to get that footage. So in many respects, that helped me, overcome any potential fears I may have had. But on the same token, that also can be a negative, because now you're not so attuned to the danger around you and you can get yourself in trouble. But yes, it's definitely pretty scary and not for the faint of heart when you start getting to those ladder crossings.
All right. We've got another grade 5-6 class, 561. They're hanging out backstage, so I'm going to bring them into the call. There we go. Oh, can you grab the mute for me?
Do your ears pop? And if they do, how do you deal with it?
They don't typically pop like if you're going up an elevator to the top of, let's say, a skyscraper, or flying in an airplane, because you're slowly, gradually moving up in altitude. So usually you're okay when it comes to the pressure. The bigger issue is trying to breathe. On the summit of Everest, you have 1/3 of the oxygen density there than you would have down on sea level. So you're very hypoxic. You're very struggling for air. So just thinking, standing, doing mundane things at those altitudes are extremely hard. So I think that's kind of the bigger issue, is the lack of pressure.
Guess what?
Versus,
We're not having it anymore.
trying to acclimatize to quick elevation gains to make your ears pop.
All right, that's a great question. To either of our 5-6 classes, if you do have a follow-up question, I can see everything backstage, so just turn your camera on, and that'll be my cue to come in and check on you again. I'll also check in more towards the end of the event as well. We have a few more questions here on YouTube. Let's see, where did my YouTube chat go? There it is. Okay, so this first one is from Andrea, and Andrea would like to know a little bit more about getting gear to base camp in the first place. So, who was carrying the equipment, things like the ladders and stuff like that? How was everything getting where it needed to be?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think I mentioned early on the slides, when you saw that yak going across one of those river crossings, is, well, you have 3 ways to get stuff to Everest Base Camp, and that includes the climbing gear or any kind of food supplies. Essentially, Everest Base Camp is an international tent city that's about a mile long every April. And so you have to be able to live there for a month and a half or so. So you have to get food and you have to get supplies there. And everything that goes to Everest Base Camp either gets there by a helicopter on the back of a human being, a porter, for example, or the stuff that we're carrying in our own personal gear, or an animal. A yak is, the best animal to try to bring gear to base camp. And so that's one thing. The ladders themselves, which are carried also to base camp on the back of an animal, a yak, all that preparation to set up the base camp itself, so it's habitable for 43 days in our case, that starts months in advance. So the different expedition teams start sending crews up there months in advance to start setting up the tent platforms and digging out the ice in order to make it a livable environment for the climbers and the teams there, the cooks and the chefs and the porters and everybody else that's got to be at base camp. They start months in advance delivering gear there. And the ladders ladders, once they get to base camp, there's a group of guys that are known as the icefall doctors. And their only job is during the climbing season to set the route through that Khumbu icefall, that 3 to 6 foot flowing sheet of ice that's the highest glacier in the world that moves downhill with these massive blocks of ice to try to navigate the way through the icefall and to maintain that route throughout that climbing season. So that's how they will carry the ladders up in the icefall. They will tie them together, they will anchor them down, and they will constantly try to maintain them throughout the climbing season. And so, yeah, that's how the ladders get into the icefall.
All right. I can see our 5-6s have turned their camera back on, so let's grab another question.
So I have 2 questions. First question is, what age do you start like the thing? And also, do you still go like right now sometimes?
The thing is, if you mean when did I start? How old was when I started thinking about going to Mount Everest,
Yeah.
or training for it?
What age do you start going to?
Okay. So, the high altitude mountaineering takes to learn all the skills, and to start training to go to bigger mountains. In this case, for me to go to Mount Everest, by the time I started training, to get polished up on all the skills I needed to know to be able to survive and to have the techniques, it took me 9 years from the time I started climbing big mountains to the time I actually got to Mount Everest. So it took quite a bit of time of training. What age do you start? It really depends on when you start taking interest in it. But the ideal age actually for climbing Mount Everest is really not super young and not super old. It's actually in the mid 30s to the early 40s. The reason why, there's a couple genetic things or a couple physiological things that take place as you get a little bit older. First, of course, you got experience. You've learned a lot about how to survive in these extreme environments, but actually your lung and your brain cavity is better adjusted to deal with the pressure differences from the gases and the lack of barometric pressure and a lack of oxygen in your system. When you get to about 30s to early 40s is when you have the most rigid membranes in your body to deal with that, and also to have that athletic ability to still do it. So that's kind of the sweet spot. Once you start getting a little bit older, then you start to lose the athletic ability, which then hinders you. So if you're too young, your body is not really tough enough, is the best way to put it, to deal with that, extreme altitude and extreme environment. But if you're too old, you're not physically capable enough. So really what you want to kind of do is fall in somewhere in the early 30s, to the early 40s, and that window is ideal to give yourself the best chance.
Okay, let's dip back to YouTube. We've got a few more questions that have come in. Our first group, let's see, where are they from? There they are. Some 4th graders, Mr. Pearson's crew, hanging out in California. They are wondering, do you ever plan on going back? And if so, what might you do differently?
Oh, I'm not planning on going back, but if I were to go back, it would have to be for a very good reason. It wouldn't be for me to climb the mountain. It probably wouldn't even be for me to film the Quest Everest, say 2.0 or Quest Everest VR 2.0. It would have to be for a very good charitable reason for me to risk my life again and take all that time and training and money and effort to go back to try it again. But no, I'm not. My initial intention is not to go back. But if there was something that was very, very important to do in order to bring awareness to maybe a cause or something, maybe I would consider it. But as of right now, I'm not planning on going back now.
All right. Reed is tuning in with us right now, and Reed would like to know, at any time on the mountain, did you ever feel sick? Maybe something like altitude sickness?
I actually got sick. I got a flu. As a matter of fact, it was the sickest I've ever been in my life. And it was when we were going to doing a acclimatization rotation up to Camp 3. So the reason why it took 43 days for us to climb Everest from base camp to the summit and back is because you have to let your body adjust to the increasing altitude. So your body, essentially what you're doing is shocking your body to produce more red blood cells, so therefore it can process more oxygen. So it's a slow process. So you work your way up and down the mountain multiple times. You're essentially climbing Everest 2.5 times to make it to the top. So the first time we went through the Khumbu Icefall, we went to Camp 1, and then we spent a couple of days there and came back down. The next time we went to Camp 2, spent a couple of days there, and then you either come back down or you move to Camp 3. And then when you get to Camp 3 at 23,500, 23,600 feet, you don't go any higher to acclimatize until you're ready to go for the summit, because your body can no longer adjust to the increasing altitude. You can't gain any more benefit from a red blood cell production. So that's the highest you go, is about 23,500 feet. And then you go all the way back down to base camp at 17,500 feet. And then you wait for the ideal weather conditions to try to make your way all the way back to the summit at 29,032 feet. But in between that process of when we went to Camp 2 and Camp 3, I actually got a bug. I got a flu. And the thing is, when you get up to that altitude, a lot of your body's systems break down. Your digestive system breaks down. You can't even really taste anything anymore. You don't have an appetite anymore. And of course, your immune system shuts down. And therefore, when I got the flu, it was the sickest I ever got, to the point where they wanted to helicopter evacuate me all the way back down to Kathmandu at low altitude in order to try to get some more oxygen and to get some more low altitude in me in order to try to heal, because you can't heal at those altitudes well either. I didn't. I gutted it out. But it was the sickest I ever felt. Matter of fact, I was sitting in my tent at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet wearing this down suit, which you normally wouldn't wear at Camp 2, and sleeping in a negative 40 below sleeping bag on top of it, and I was still shivering. That's how cold I was. So yeah, I got extremely sick. It took me about 13 days to get over it, but luckily that summit window that opened up for us, which is completely dependent on the weather, was able to delay long enough for my body to get healthy back at base camp over that time.
All right. I see our 5-6 camera, so we'll grab another question.
Do if somebody breaks their leg or gets really, really sick, and you're at the top?
Oh, you're in trouble. The problem with climbing Mount Everest, there's certain parts of the mountain, once you get above Camp 3, essentially can no longer get rescued by a helicopter. So if you are above Camp 3, which is the highest a helicopter can try to get you, they may not be able to get you because of the weather conditions and the thin air. It's hard for the helicopter to generate enough lift to pick up a human body. But if they're willing to try it, that's the highest point. So let's say if you get sick or you break your leg or something like that, or your arm, then you might be able to get helicopter rescued all the way at Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, and of course, base camp. But anywhere above that, you're in deep trouble. So then essentially, if you can't stand and put one foot over another, or with a little bit of assistance, put one foot over another, you might not make it back down. And the higher you go, then it becomes a situation where you're now putting 5, 6, 7, 8 other people's lives at risk just to try to save one person. So if you can't get down on your own accord, unfortunately, you might not make it back down. And unfortunately, there's 340 climbers that have died on Mount Everest. So yeah, it becomes essentially like being on the moon and trying to get rescued. If you're on the summit of Everest and you break your leg somehow or twist your ankle where you can't walk, you might not make it down.
All right. We're going to check in with our home school crew one more time just to see if they have one more question for us. If you do, go ahead and unmute.
I think I'm good for now. Provided a lot of good information.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out today. One more question for you, Alex. This is from YouTube. And they're wondering, do you have any statistics of the year you were climbing? So do you know how many people attempted and how many were successful during the season that you climbed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that is variable. It varies every year. Not only the amount of people that happen to perish every year, somebody dies on Everest, and the average is somewhere between 5 and 7 people every year die on Everest. The highest being 21 in one season. But our year, we had 5 people unfortunately perish. The number of climbers that summited, that is a good question. I want to say it was a couple hundred. I want to say it was like 230, 285, maybe something like that. All of that is in a database. As a matter of fact, if you go to the Himalayan database, you can look this up. It has the statistics of everybody that attempted Everest on a given year, who has made it, who has died, and the summit ratios to attempts. So every year that changes, but you could go to the Himalayan database and get that exact answer. I don't want to give you false information, so that would be kind of the Bible or the Wikipedia page to get the correct answer for every given year.
All right. Well, I know, that illness that you had on the mountain probably didn't feel so hot at the time, but it did kind of push you back to a later weather window, and you got an amazing experience when you did get to the top, because I imagine a lot of those 200 plus people were potentially in lines going up to the top, maybe only had a couple minutes. So sometimes things just work out the way they're supposed to.
You're absolutely right, Joe. Ironically, the original summit day, which was set to be for the 18, turned out to be a horrible day. And our day that got pushed back to the 21st, as you can see in the stills, and if you watch either the Quest Everest VR virtual reality film or the Quest Everest 2D documentary, you can see it turned out to be a bluebird day. So yeah, I mean, it was fortuitous, so maybe that, me getting sick at that time was a benefit. So yeah, you never know how it pans out, but it was meant to be. And to be able to have the summit of Everest alone with only one other person for 45 minutes, especially after being sick for 13 days and having to push back our summit bid, turned out to be great. No question about it.
All right. Well, we'll start off with a big shout out to our classrooms. Thank you to those who are tuning in via YouTube and sending in those great questions. A big shout out to our camera crew who joined us. It was great to have you with us. In fact, I see a few of them. It looks like our 5.6 camera just came on. So we definitely want to give them a chance to give a big wave. And thank you for joining us. Shout out to Decker for joining us from backstage as well. It was great to see you. Our 5.6 are back there, but it doesn't look like their camera reconnected. It was great to have them too. As always, thanks for all those amazing questions. And Alex, it's always a pleasure to have you with us to share your experiences. And, sure hoping there's more quests coming down the line that we can connect and share more stories with students.
Absolutely, Joe. It's my honor. Like I said, I'm humbly honored and fortunate to be able to climb Mount Everest and to be able to come back with the footage to share with the world and to be able to share and talk to with you all today. So thank you so much for having me. And, if you want to have me back at any given time, you just let me know. I'll be more than happy to do so.
All right. We hope to see your classrooms again in October. For now, we're going to sign off with a big thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.